This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
Joining me now, John Brummett, columnist with the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Always good to get off to a good start with you, John. Good to see you this morning.
Happy week. Good to be with you.
Let's begin with some sad news. Made a little bit of national circles over the weekend. Alice Stewart, a longtime Politico and a former reporter here in Arkansas, gone onto the national stage with CNN, Harvard, some other places, passed away very unexpectedly. And just kind of your thoughts on Alice. She was a genuinely good person. I can't find anybody that speaks ill of her. So that's pretty good life well lived, I think.
I think so. When you talk about something being stunning, this takes stunning to a new level. I signed on to I guess X on Saturday afternoon, and there was a statement from Asa Hutchinson lamenting the passing of his good friend Alice Stewart, and I said it's got to be another Alice Stewart. As you know, we all know she was a marathoner, very healthy. Totally a shock. I first saw her on a weekend anchoring the Channel 11 KTHV News. And with all due respect to weekend anchors and local news, I thought she seems to have a lot on the ball to be doing this only on the weekend.
I think it was ARK, not KTHV.
Was it? It wasn't. You wasn't.
Yep.
Well, thanks. Well, sometimes I can't tell them apart, but that's good. Thanks for correcting me on that. And she was good, and then she managed to become, tell me if this is right, press secretary to Mike Huckabee when he was governor. She did a stint there, and it was that association with Huckabee and his running for president that gave her a bit of a parlay into national politics, and she had a great interest in it, a great skill at it, and she wound up working for Ted Cruz and Michelle Bachmann and others. But her true success was when, with her talent and her will, she made herself into a national, mildly conservative commentator. By mildly, I mean only in the context of what much of conservative commentary has become. She was not a Trumper, and she was not somebody who was completely apologetic for any conservative or Republican or Trumpian or MAGA activity. She had an ability to have a solid philosophy, but to be practical or reasonable about it. And she made herself into a prominent national commentator. And she did it all from starting at Channel 4 in Little Rock. And the outpouring of regard, all similar from the leading people of national media and national politics, describing her as uniformly kind, thoughtful, fair-minded, a good, generous person. She was always very kind to me and said nice things about me in our Twitter exchanges, even when we were sparring lightly about matters. And it was really, it floored all of us. I know it did you, did me, when this news hit Saturday afternoon. We need more Alice Stewarts in the business of national political commentary. I value more than anything else these days somebody who's genuinely conservative, but not unreasonable or hyper-partisan about it. And that's what she was.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. So lots of nice things to still be said about her, and we'll keep folks posted on arrangements, and I'm sure there'll be some sort of memorial for her here locally as well. Former Speaker of the House Benny Petrus also passed away. He's not been on the political scene for a couple of decades here, but he was kind of there during that turn from Mike Huckabee back to Mike Beebe days when Arkansas politics had a little fun stuff going on all the time. Benny Petrus was a little bit of a character too. He was a fun guy as well. What any thoughts on Speaker Petrus?
I have several favorable thoughts on him too. He served during that period when Arkansas's legislature was severely term limited, and you had nobody out there with any experience. We subsequently relaxed those standards to the point that they're much more reasonable. But he came along. He's a car dealer from Stuttgart, and he gets elected at a time when I think in the House you can only serve 3 terms. I think he served from 2003 to 2009. So you're going to have a Speaker of the House who has no experience, who has to run that place. And Benny got elected because he was well liked, because he had certain skills of engagement and connection with people from his sales background and just from being a good guy. And he ran the House ably. And I thought he was a nominal Democrat, and I figured he was a typical conservative Democrat. But you remember, BB was pushing for and passed his campaign promise to reduce the sales tax. Speaker Petrus was emailing me for a while every day, pushing an alternative, which was to do income tax reform at the low level, at the lower income levels.
I remember
He's not going to get anywhere with it. He's not going to get anywhere with it because, BB just got elected on the sales tax, and cutting people's grocery tax, grocery sales taxes was highly popular. But Benny had figured out, or had been advised, or had been persuaded, this is actually a better way to go. And you ought to talk to Brummett and Rock and some others and see if you could do something with this. He couldn't, but I admired that he did it. I also admired that while he wasn't the most articulate or legislatively accomplished person I've ever dealt with, he had leadership skills and engagement skills. All those inexperienced legislators out there during that term limit period, we're glad to have him up there in that speaker's chair.
No doubt about that. All right, let's move on from some of the bad news that we've had to deal with to some of the good news that we can deal with here. You've been firing off some arrows in your Sunday column, and you gave both Joe Biden and Donald Trump up arrows, and I'm going to let you explain to people why you see both of their trends moving up in terms of conventional wisdom. Joe Biden first.
Well, let me explain first. Conventional wisdom arrows are fired. I sometimes call them the ever fickle arrows of conventional wisdom, because, and I mean them to be snapshots at this time based on the direction they're going. So, given that, do you know that the Dow closed for the first time ever over 40,000? Do you know that the rate of inflation reduced in April? Do you know that Joe Biden took advantage of the Trump team's salivation at debates to negotiate just what he wanted out of the debates, which is to have them early, so there'll be time for repair, and to have them absent outside the National Commission on Presidential Debates, so there won't be an audience, so they won't have to consider the rules as to whether Kennedy qualifies. He got it just the way he wanted it. Plus, I don't know if you saw it, and I've only seen parts of it, but I've heard from a lot of people that they watched an interview he did recently with Howard Stern, in which I've had people say, I didn't think he was capable of being president, but now I'm wondering if maybe he isn't. He seemed sharp enough. And of course, it was a groveling, friendly interview, which helped. But even so, all of that is to say, right now, the arrow direction, I think it's up for Joe Biden. It's not reflected in the polls. A little. He's closing the gap a little, but he's still the underdog in this race. But his direction positive at the present time.
Still
for those reasons I said.
For that arrow to change multiple times between now and November. Let's talk about Donald Trump. You also see an up arrow for him, despite the fact that he's been sitting in a courtroom for the last 3 weeks in Lower Manhattan.
Here's why. For that very reason, he's been sitting in a courtroom. He's had humiliating things said about him, having to do with his personal behavior and his personal integrity and the nature of his associations. And most people tend to think, well, all that probably happened. But his poll numbers are not eroding, not changing. He is holding steady for the reason that this case, one is his base is strong, but this case is as harmful to the Democratic cause as it possibly could be to Trump, because they appear to be overplaying their hand with a politicized prosecution about sex, and based on witnesses that are questionably credible. It's not the case any Democrat wanted to be the one to take place before the election. Even so, if you can sit there and have a porn star talk about her actions with you, and have Michael Cohen talk about the seemingly sleazy way they sometimes operated in the Trump empire, and not suffer that I can see any serious or really detectable political fallout, then your arrow's up too. So neither one of them is, neither one of these candidates is right for the time. Neither one is right for the occasion. Neither one is the best each party could do, but it's what we've got. And at the present time, for totally different reasons, I give them both an arrow up.
All right. Can't recall if you had an arrow for Governor Sarah Sanders, but there was a lengthy article done with her in Politico late last week that came online. Not the most flattering of stories. Basically says she doesn't really care much for governing. I really kind of had a little difficult time figuring out what the angle of the story was. It seemed to rely some on what those of us that cover the governor think about her running. I kind of said it's, she's got her own prerogative to do what she wants to do in terms of her media relations, but it spun off into some other areas too. What was your takeaway from that article, and do you think it inflicts any political damage on Governor Sanders?
Not much, if any. The reporter approached me about talking, and I'll tell you what I honestly told her. I said, for me to talk about her arrogance and her aloofness in her dealings with the media, it strikes me as sour grapes, and I'm not interested in talking about sour grapes. I don't want to whine about it, and so I just declined. She does, but she's not the only Republican governor in the country who in recent years has blown off the local newspaper media and the mainstream media. The world has changed so much that she doesn't need really, just as a Republican governor in Pennsylvania a few years ago was never dealing with the local press at all. It's a playbook really at the state level, and to a large extent at the national level, for how certainly at the state level with local media, how they don't matter that much. Think about me. I work for the statewide paper, but the statewide paper is now a different product than it used to be. Bill Clinton had to deal with me as a columnist when I'm in a paper that's reaching 250,000 people. It's about a fourth of that now. And a lot of it is concentrated in central Arkansas, which is Democratic, which she doesn't count on or need. And I'm a columnist who largely appeals to that group. I'd like to appeal more broadly and think I should, but mainly, let's be serious. You appeal to people read you because they like to agree with you, because they agree with what you're saying. There's no reason for her to talk to me. There isn't. And I don't get worked up about it. So that's a context that I think needs to be applied. Her total absorption in national politics and her just taking a MAGA persona and transferring it from the West Wing to Arkansas is so radically different from the kind of personally engaging retail politicking governors that we've had, from Clinton to Bumpers to Pryor to her father to Beebe to Hutchinson, that it's stark, and that's a bigger difference. And I think the time is right for that too, sadly, because all politics is nationalized. But That's the bigger thing. The fact that we in the press think she ought to talk to us. Now, the working daily press requires answers from the governor. I get that, and that's not me. And even if the answers are no good, sometimes answers are so general that they don't amount to anything. But I think that local reporters get some sort of response usually. But it is this whole new type of governorship, which is totally nationalized. That was the other part of the story, and I think the more substantial part of the story. And you have a lot of state issues that would have been trouble that has occurred around the state that would have been much bigger in the 80s or 90s or the 00s than now, because she is of a different time and of a radically different style. So that's what I meant.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. So, yeah, it's an interesting read. I don't think the governor will be putting it in circulation, but I think you're right. It's where we are in politics at this point in time, and that national political platform is really where it's at. I will say too, I think that Governor Sanders is still a pretty viable candidate for vice president. She's not getting as much talk as a few other people are, but if you just look at the boxes on the checklist that she would strike for Donald Trump, it would be a pretty positive for a younger person, a female, a governor, somebody that's run national politics before, somebody who's on good terms with him. She's got a lot of positives working for her in terms of what he needs in a vice presidential candidate. What do you think?
I would agree with that, except people say I'm just trying to get rid of her, get her out of Arkansas, which might be a factor. Yeah, I think that's fair political analysis. If I were in Trump's place, I'd drop out of the race. But if I were in Trump's place and picking a running mate that I thought would do no harm and be basically helpful, sure. I can't think of anybody better, certainly better than all these guys, Ramaswamy and the guy from the Dakotas, and who showed up in their matching red Trump ties at the trial, hanging out in the trial and saying whatever he wants. Sure, she'd be fine. And by the way, she is sustaining declining approval ratings in Arkansas. There has been there's been loss to her political standing. That is true. I don't think it's anything that threatens re-election, certainly against a Democrat. The Democrats they can't compete right now in Arkansas. Yeah. And I think that the learns thing, as it further unfolds, may do more damage if it starts to affect popular rural schools in Arkansas. But, so I want to make it clear, she's not invincible, and she has, in fact, lost some popularity in the state. But this article's points were really broader than just Arkansas, I think.
I would say, too, on her political poll, or standing in some of the polling data that we've seen, I mean, she's still got a 15 to 20% difference between favorable or unfavorable, or job approval versus disapproval. Most politicians take that in this day and age.
Well, sure, you take it, but you also consider everything in the context of where you were. Yeah. And her direction is not good. Although, because I'm such a generous, fair-minded person, I did have an arrow on her for Sunday, and it was up.
All right.
Largely because, I don't. This lectern thing has come to nothing. A lot of these controversies have not been severe on her. There's been more racket than there's been damage, I think.
Fair point.
And I'm not really thrilled about that, but I'm obliged to observe it as an accurate observation. Okay?
All right. Always good to catch up with you. John Brummett with the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Thanks for your time.
Enjoyed it, Roby. Bye-bye.